today's World Insight with Tian Wei. NATO drills in Norway on the heels of Russia war games. Sign of a new Cold War? And a direct answer from Myanmar's defense minister about regional security and the country's controversial Rakhine situation. Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN. We start today's show with Norway, where NATO has launched its biggest military exercise since the end of the Cold War. Troops and equipment from 31 allied countries arrived via land, sea and air. Dubbed as Trident Juncture 18, the exercise is seen as a show of power to remind Russia that the North Atlantic Alliance is strong and prepared to act. The drill is set to continue through November the 7th. Despite Russia's complaint, the alliance military activities are too near its borders. The NATO chief, who is visiting Norway for the Trident Juncture War Games, added a difficult relationship with Russia needed to be managed by increased military presence and more military exercises to prevent incidents and misunderstandings.
We don't want a new Cold War. We don't want a new arms race. So therefore, we need to work for a better relationship with Russia. And even without a better relationship with Russia, we need to manage a difficult relationship with Russia, meaning that with more military presence, more exercises, high tensions, we need to make sure that we prevent incidents, accidents, misunderstanding, miscalculations, and if they happen, make sure that they don't spiral out of control.
For the latest on the NATO drill and what it means behind the scenes, we are joined in our Beijing studio Cui Hongjian, head of the European Studies Department at the China Institute of International Studies. In Brussels, we have Bruno Leite, who is a senior fellow for security and defense policy with the German Marshall Fund of the United States. In Moscow, we invited William Courtney, an adjunct recent senior fellow at the RAND Cooperation, who's also a former special assistant to the U.S. President for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. I want to welcome the three of you, gentlemen, to be with us. Starting with you, Mr. Courtney, the real reasons and the target behind the biggest ever NATO drill. Russia?
These exercises, while this is the largest exercise, Trident Juncture, since the Cold War for NATO, these exercises are fairly routine. In the current case, a key part of this exercise is to be able to move large numbers of forces and demonstrate the capability that they can be moved to help defend a NATO ally, in this case, Norway. Russia recently had a large exercise in the Russian Far East. Also had a similar purpose, to try to be sure that large numbers of forces can be mobilized. So in both cases, they're fairly routine, but they are at a larger scale than typically in the past.
All right, Mr. Leite, from your view, is it really a demonstration of power by NATO to Russia, or is it that the actions to protect the people in Norway? Many really wonder what is the real purpose.
Well, of course, we have to admit that NATO-Russia relations are problematic nowadays, but saying that this drill is something held to provoke Russia, that goes a stretch too far. NATO is a military alliance, and that's what militaries do. They drill, they exercise. This Trident Juncture exercise has been held regularly since 2015. There has been clear communication about it. There are also Russian observers invited to monitor how the exercise goes. So really the primary objective here is to test NATO's collective defense, not to send any signals or to escalate or to provoke.
It's not to send signals, not to escalate, not to provoke. That is from our guest in Brussels. Mr. Cui, agree with all of these phrases?
As we know that indeed, I think the Russia and the NATO's relations would be a very background for this exercise. But of course, as we know, I don't think that it's just happened, in Norway and without any target. If just like NATO mentioned that, yes, we are trying to protect the Norwegian people, but protect Norwegian from which kind of threat? So undoubtedly, I think that we could not deny that indeed the tension between NATO and also Russia, especially some Baltic states, Baltic member states of the NATO with Russia, I think is a very big consideration for NATO.
Well, that's probably your observation. Of course, it's not fair that we're only talking about NATO's drills and not talking about Russia's recently. If we take a look at the comparison between these two, the NATO-led Trident Juncture 18 exercises are only taking place a month after Russia-led Vostok 2018 war games. Both represent an escalation, some say, in troop participation. The NATO-led drill includes 50,000 troops, 10,000 vehicles, 250 aircraft. In contrast, the Russia-led drill included 300,000 troops, 36,000 vehicles, and 1,000 aircraft. Of course, numbers are only numbers. They do not necessarily represent the whole meanings between the competitions, quote unquote. But what are you reading out of this, Mr. Courtney? Are we going to see an escalation of show of muscles from both sides as we go on?
It's not clear there will be an escalation. What we are seeing are exercises that have purposes. For example, as I mentioned, in the logistics area, trying to assemble large forces and put them in a place where they would be needed in the event of a conflict. So this is not really an exercise to intimidate or coerce. For example, the Russian exercise in the Far East, the Vostok that you mentioned, that was not meant to intimidate China. In fact, Russia invited Chinese forces to participate, and a couple thousand soldiers did. Likewise, the exercise Trident Juncture off Norway is not meant to intimidate or coerce Russia. It is meant to show that to show that NATO can, in fact, defend its allies and assemble the forces required to do that.
Mr. Courtney, what kind of defense is NATO thinking about these days? As the world picture is evolving very quickly, we have a lot of things going on at the same time. The relationship between the United States and other countries of NATO in terms of budget, in terms of responsibilities. We also have Russia's relationship apparently warming up with the United States, with Putin being invited likely to the United States by the U.S. president. You also have among the NATO countries, even within the European camps, you see very different opinions as to what to do. So, Mr. Courtney, what kind of things are we really talking about here?
The Russian intervention in Ukraine in 2014 caused a lot of NATO members, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, the Baltic area of Scandinavia, to reassess their own security. A number of NATO members have been reducing defense spending over a long period after the Cold War ended. That's begun to reverse. There are modest increases now in NATO European spending, larger increases in U.S. spending. The purpose of these exercises is really in great part to reassure countries that are closer to Russia that NATO really is a meaningful militarily organization, and that NATO will come to their defense if they are coerced.
All right. Well, Mr. Dredge, recently I also had an exclusive interview with the Deputy Secretary General of NATO when she was attending the Xiangshan Forum in Beijing. Obviously, you see from NATO official side, there is pretty much saying, you know, things as usual, nothing that different. But, Mr. Dredge, we do know there were enormous debate about the share of money, budget, and also the share of responsibility between the United States and other members of NATO, particularly the European countries. So what do you make of those backdrop in terms of what's going on right now?
Well, obviously, the alliance is reassessing its way forward. It's defining what to do in the future. Obviously, transatlantic solidarity is a pillar, is a foundation of NATO. We did see that over the past years there were problems in Europe with European governments not spending it on defense. I think we can now agree that this curve has been halted. European governments no longer cut their defense budgets or actually even increase them. So I think we do see a very hard attempt to safeguard this transatlantic solidarity. We also see that Washington is very committed to European security. Actually, what we have seen so far in the Trump administration are very concrete measures on the ground to support Europe, to support NATO. And I think that the exercise that we see now in Norway definitely also is a testimony of this transatlantic unity and solidarity.
You could argue so, and yet, Mr. Cui, we have seen the debate is quite enormous. At the same time, the European countries, particularly within the EU, the framework, has begun to talk about their own defense and their own defense structure, their own defense strategy, and their own defense means. It's totally different, or somewhat different at least, from that of NATO or from that alliance with the United States. Mr. Cui, your comment here.
Yeah. Yes, as we know, recent years, the European countries talk a lot of the, we call it strategic autonomy, to build up its own, military or defense capability, and to deal with some very specific threat towards European countries. So indeed, as we know, it gives a little bit of competition between the so-called ESDP and also NATO. But of course, as we know from the United States, it's not so happy about it. So I think now more access, more actions, more even some tension with Russia or some other countries, I think it would be in the interest of NATO.
To bring them together.
Yeah, to take the advantage. Against any ambition from European countries to establish its own capability.
I see, Mr. Leite. I think that has led us to the next question, which is this biggest ever military drill of NATO. Is it a show of force to the others, or is it a show of force for themselves in order to boost up the confidence about the structure and about the alliance, which has been there for decades and things have changed?
Well, it's certainly a show of force to NATO itself. It really is a measure to show the NATO member states that NATO is there, that NATO has the back of its members. But on the same time, it's also a show to deter. Potential aggressors, that NATO is ready if one of its members is being attacked. So, I would say that there's a dual symbol there. As a member state, we can protect them, and we are also here to deter.
Right. Going to you, Mr. Courtney, about the debate between the United States and other NATO members, particularly some of the biggest ones of the European continent. What about that budget share? What about that responsibility share? Is there a timeline? Well, are we going to see President Trump coming from the United States being once again showing his very different style in front of his colleagues? Let's just say for the NATO summit, maybe next year or the year after the next, that if he doesn't got the money that he thought everybody should put on table, what's going to happen if there is carrots, there has to be a stick? That was always what the United States has been saying. Is that applying to the relationship between the United States and other NATO members when it comes to the money?
The issue of what is called burden sharing in NATO has been with us for decades. President Trump has expressed concern that some of the NATO allies are not spending 2% of their gross domestic product, as all the NATO allies have promised to do. And so it's put pressure on some of the NATO allies to spend more. And indeed, spending is going up in the NATO European area. It's gone up probably 15% or so the last 4 years. But it's also true that those countries, after the Russian intervention in Ukraine, decided on their own that they should be increasing their defense efforts. So it's not exactly clear that increased spending, which has occurred in a number of NATO countries, is a result of President Trump's entreaties or whether it's a result of Russian intervention in Ukraine. But we do see the alliance coming more committed to increasing spending and raising consciousness among its population that NATO is still an important military alliance.
Very interesting. While you are speaking, Mr. Courtney, I see the smiles on the face of Mr. Lede. You want to respond to that?
No, absolutely. You know, talking to you here from Brussels, there is a realization here in Europe that Europeans must defend themselves. And we've seen over the past year many initiatives now at European Union level, permanent structured cooperation, European Defence Fund that will fund technology and development. So actually there are many, many developments happening here in Europe, here in Brussels as well, that make us Europeans more confident, I think, about their own capability to defend themselves.
So, Mr. Cui, of course, that would mean more diversities when you see the strategies of defense worldwide. And now we do have a lot of geopolitical changes. Well, China and the United States is only one of those changes that we are witnessing right now. So, with this very moving picture, as we are seeing right now within NATO, what kinds of strategic opportunities does it promote or propose to members of NATO countries, both as a whole and also individually, and with other countries and other blocs or other possibilities?
I think, yes, I think always, especially after the Cold War, the NATO always tried to struggle for its survival. I think that, yes, the Ukrainian crisis gave maybe a course for NATO to survive and also maybe to get some solidarity among the member states. But of course now, indeed, I think the change of the policy of Mr. Trump towards the NATO and also towards the European allies give another, negative impact on NATO. So now I think maybe NATO is trying to take the opportunity now maybe to look for some common threat for all of the member states. And then I think another approach for NATO try to get some more maybe confidence from Mr. Trump, from American allies, is to get some more also expansion to other regions of the world, not only in Europe.
All right, Mr. Lede, going to you. It is a legitimate question, isn't it? I mean, now you've seen the leadership change or potential leadership change, for example, in Germany when it comes to party roles and the key figures of the parties. So we could see some changes of heart, some changes of action, even changes of strategies coming from different European countries. And so what does that mean, once again, with this part of the change overall for what is NATO is about?
Well, despite the many elections that we had in Europe over the past year or two and the changed leadership, we actually see a fair amount of continuity in European security strategy. We see that the Europeans, as they've been trying for the past 20 years, are developing their own capabilities, but I think there's much more awareness now and question of how to do so while also considering the relationship with NATO. The big thing here in town in Brussels is how to boost cooperation between NATO and the European Union. What can they do together? I think this is definitely a big topic. I could also add that in many European capitals, despite some of the transatlantic tensions that we've seen, the United States is still being perceived as a very strong ally. And I would probably argue that also in Washington, despite perhaps some confused signals, we see that many people in the Trump administration, whether we talk about State Departments, Department of Defense, National Security Council, there are many people that believe in a transatlantic link.
Of course, the link is not just about the White House and other capitals, but also a comprehensive, various layers of relations among NATO members themselves. But that would not be able to explain all the changes that is going on right now. Mr. Cui, you see also different layers of the European countries, that their relationship with the United States have been evolving, whether they are the former Eastern European countries or France, Germany. The UK itself is now going through its own period of changes. So how will these countries' relationship among themselves, as well as their own politics, eventually influence their strategy for defense and therefore eventually the fate of NATO?
Yes, I think that that's also a reason why NATO will take so frequent exercise. I think it's also a very maybe useful instrument for NATO to always strengthen this coordination between the member states. As we know, even for European member states, they do have a different concern of security. For example, for these maybe North European countries, indeed, they regard Russia as a potential threat. But maybe it's not the same case for some Southern European countries. So I think to give some more maybe functional instrument like exercise and some more communication, more coordination will be very necessary for NATO to keep its solidarity. But of course, at the same time, I don't think that just exercise will be testimony enough to the capability of NATO. Once there will be some real threat, I'm not sure what will happen. Indeed, maybe for the diversity of a different concern of security.
All right, before we go to Mr. Courtney from the United States. Mr. Courtney, we see a lot of interactions among the military officials worldwide over the past few months. Even the U.S. Defense Secretary is meeting with the Chinese Defense Secretary. That's quite something given the current circumstances. I would like to ask you, though, sir, with the geopolitics changing so dramatically, at least on the surface, what will these joint military exercises or military interactions among different parties eventually mean for a thought-thinking process of reaching some kinds of mature strategy worldwide about defense? Mr. Courtney, your thought before we go.
Well, it's encouraging that military leaders and defense leaders of a number of countries do have a lot of interaction. For example, Russia and the United States have had a very successful deconfliction interaction in Syria to avoid accidents or misunderstandings. That's worked well. In the South China Sea, East China Sea, there's a lot of shipping. It's natural that Chinese military officials, U.S. military officials, others from the region would want to have interaction to avoid accidents and misunderstandings there as well. So this is quite stabilizing, actually, to have so many military-to-military contacts. And so that's a positive complement, if you will. It reinforces diplomatic activity among the countries.
Well, I guess with that positive note, we could, and we have to wrap up today's discussion. The time is up. For now, thank you so much, the three gentlemen, for joining us from your own perspectives. Cui Hongjian, Bruno Leite, and last but not least, William Courtney. Really appreciate it. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on the program. Direct answers from Myanmar's defense minister about the regional security and the country's refugee situation. That one-on-one interview right after this break. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Myanmar, a Southeast Asian country that has gone through many changes in the past few years alone. It acceded to the ASEAN, adopted a military-drafted constitution, and put in place a civilian government. Meanwhile, China and Myanmar, as neighbors, have improved comprehensive strategic cooperation. The two countries are working together to push forward economic development as well as friendly cooperation between the two militaries to jointly safeguard regional peace and stability. Last week, China and the 10-member ASEAN launched the joint naval drills, and the Defense Minister of Myanmar, Sein Wing, attended the 8th Beijing Xiangshan Forum and met with Chinese State Councilor and Defense Minister Wei Fenghe. At the sidelines of the forum, I talked with Minister Sein Wing about China and Myanmar's security ties, Myanmar's civilian-military relations, and current issues in the country. Mr. Minister, thank you so much for joining us on CGTN. How do you see the security and defense cooperation prospect between China and Myanmar?
Myanmar and China have been maintaining comprehensive strategic relations as China and Myanmar are the initiating countries to conduct the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, who are working together as security friends. In the security perspective, the significant change in the Asia-Pacific region is that the U.S. has reorganized its Pacific Command into Indo-Pacific Command. Their purpose is not only in the Pacific region, but also in the Indian Ocean region. That's why countries around the Indian Ocean are concerned that there would be tensions related to security in the region.
Are you concerned?
Yeah.
Why?
If there are power struggles between two powerful countries, so there would be some effort on small countries.
This is a difficult time, many say, Mr. Minister. I'm sure you know better than I do that apparently some people try to make the world to force everybody to choose sides, whether with one power or with another power. Obviously, that's not what many countries in the world wants to do. So to Myanmar, what does that mean? How do you make a good balance for your own interest?
We have been practicing independent, active, and non-aligned foreign policy since our independence. That's why we're working together with not only world powers, but also other countries in a friendly manner. Like I said before, we live under 5 principles of peaceful coexistence.
We did notice, Mr. Minister, your country and also you have been quite active in approaching your counterparts from not just China, but also regionally, let's say Japan, India as well. Could you help us to understand, even regionally, the interesting balance that you need to make in a way?
Among our neighboring countries, we have cooperation with most powerful countries, China and India, including military training programs. We also have comprehensive strategic relations with China, and we also have cooperation with Laos and Thailand that are ASEAN member countries. And we also have cooperation with other countries according to our foreign policy.
As we are speaking, the joint military drills is going on right now between China and ASEAN, naval drills, and also China, Malaysia, Thailand as well, both in the Pacific Ocean and also in the Indian Ocean. It seems that there has been some very new momentum now about military defense cooperation between China and the ASEAN countries, which Myanmar certainly is a party of it. How do you see this change, Mr. Minister, despite of the early bumpy ride, let's just say, over the past few years?
I would like to say this kind of cooperation and military drill in the region is very good. We think there is a more friendly way to make friends with each other.
As you may know, the COC and also the DOC are all in the process of negotiation, discussions. Things will get better?
I suppose so.
Good news. Mr. Minister, Myanmar has a very different system from a lot of countries compared to particularly the system of relations between the military and the government. According to your 2008 constitution, the security and defense ministers have 3 positions in the cabinet. Meanwhile, you have almost a quarter of the parliament seats going to the military officers. And you yourself have also been appointed by the military back in 2015. So how would you describe, many from outside your country really don't understand the logic of this arrangement. How would you describe now, Mr. Minister, the relationship between your government and the military now?
With regards to civil-military relation, one of my major responsibilities is civil-military relation. So far, relation between the military and the government is good. As a member of the cabinet, I have to follow orders and guidelines from our president and state leaders. At the same time, I have to fulfill my new duties assigned by the military commodore as a military personnel.
That would be very interesting to see the proportion of your work. What if there's a conflict between their decisions? What can you do?
Sometimes we have encountered this kind of conflict. I'd have to be balanced, in between.
I need to learn from your skills. One of the things people look at Myanmar is they want to look for opportunity to invest. Also, Myanmar is a country that now is more and more open to the world to seek an opportunity. But, Mr. Minister, since you are dealing with the defense and the security issue of the country, some investors, not just from China but from other parts of the world as well, wonder about the certainty of policies of Myanmar. And whether they make a deal now, will those deals be carried out in the future? Whether the security situation inside the country will be able to permit the deals to be implemented for the future. Mr. Minister, your take.
There are two securities. Law enforcement is conducted by the Ministry of Home Affairs. Myanmar has a strong sustainable development plan and had been working to carry out that plan. There are 5 goals in that plan. They are peaceful national reconciliation, security and good governance, economic stability and strengthened macroeconomic management, job creation and private school, private settlement growth, human resources and social development, natural resources and the environment.
Those are beautiful goals. But certainly you see the challenges, Mr. Minister, to say the least. For example, the ethnic militaries. What are going to be the relations between them and the overall national defense team? What is going to be the relations between them and the current government? We understand in the Panang conference, Aung San Suu Kyi promised there will be much frequent discussion and results. Many wonder, where is the result?
We are working to engage more interactions related to peace with those organizations. Although we have bottom-up approach in the past, now we work with a top-down approach. On the 15th and 16th of this month, State Councilor Commander-in-Chief had a meeting.
I understand there have been some media reports which I read about that meeting. Some of the ethnic armies, quote-unquote, complain, according to the media report, about yet there has been any result of that consultation. And yet, as you may see, Mr. Minister, it is very important for the country to maintain stability, and ethnic armies and the government is a big issue about to be sought out in order to guarantee security. So there seems to be a lot of urgency in that regard, Mr. Minister.
Now we are working on an agreement to get from the past 2 discussions, because we have 47 agreements. In coming 2020, we have 3 discussions, 3 peace talks, so we are hoping to have more agreements on upcoming discussions, peace talks.
For any country, those kind of issues would be extremely complicated because it involves militaries of different ethnic groups, it involves lives, it involves history. From your personal perspective, as the minister, what do you think is the key here to resolve this long-time challenge?
In my perspective, in my own perspective, every organization participates in this kind of activity. They have to lower their expectations, yes.
Their expectations, so that there will be compromise. Yes. When people think about Myanmar these days, they think about the Rakhine issue. Maybe the rest of the world do not necessarily know that well about the history behind it. It's certainly a complicated one for any to resolve. But the crisis has to be resolved. It's about human lives. Many wonder, Mr. Minister, what has been the role of the military in this regard? Is the military making things ever more complicated?
The Rakhine issue has been handled by the Commodore, the military, to protect and safeguard our country's boundary as the primary concern, like that of international militaries. The Myanmar Minister of Home Affairs has signed an MOU with his Bangladesh counterpart. According to that MOU, we have been ready for repatriation since earlier this year. But we haven't received yet any of official returnees transferred by Bangladesh. So far, 170 returnees who returned voluntarily have been resettled in respective villages. We have signed agreements with UNDP and UNHCR for effective resettlement and rehabilitation. As the Rakhine issue is a historic one, as you mentioned, it may have to take time for resolving this issue.
But it is human lives that we are talking about here. And therefore, what the military in Myanmar would do in order to, in your word, to guard your border is very important. And the world has been watching.
Now we are building a border fence. In previous time, you also have a fence along the border, but now we have built a far better fence.
And what about inside the country? Those are already inside the country. What has been the military doing to them, and what will be the way the military will be treating them?
For the people in the Myanmar side, the military can only help them to be cured, like medical assistance, but can't do anything apart from medical assistance. But for security and other things, they are handled by the police force.
From the very beginning, it is handled by the police force, not the military.
Yeah.
And I have your words about that.
Yeah.
From now on, what will be the solution? That issue is having a huge impact on the image of your country, which is a country many believe is on the rise. So it's very important how Myanmar is handling that issue and showing to the rest of the world what Myanmar says and what Myanmar does.
We are dealing with this issue like the refugees. If they are going up to Myanmar, we are ready to accept them. Now we are working on it.
Really, can you accept them?
Yeah.
There's so many of them.
We have records, and if they meet conditions according to those records, we will accept them. We have records like their family photos and their names. For the returnees, they need to apply for citizenship. We have a citizenship law. So when they apply for citizenship, they need to follow our citizenship law. So we will accept those who are legitimate according to our law.
Which part of the citizenship law is the most important, you think, in this matter?
According to our current law, there's a board to examine people who are not Myanmar ethnic or Myanmar citizen. They are examined, everyone. If they are qualified, they can be Myanmar citizens. Not only Bengalis, but also other citizens, other nationals. If they are qualified, we give them citizenship.
I see, Mr. Minister, you are not only having the outlines of your possible answer for our interview, but also holding a book of Aung San Suu Kyi's recent speech. Many wonder, what is your working relationship with Madam Aung San Suu Kyi? Certainly has been a spiritual leader for your country for quite some time, and has been having some very different stages of relationship with the military. How would you characterize it now?
Aung San Suu Kyi is not only our state leader, but also like a big sister for me. So we give full respect to her. Elder sister, like an elder sister.
What would characterize as an elder sister?
I call Amma.
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 Amma. That's how you call elder sister.
Yeah.
And what does elder sister usually do? You know, what kind of person would be characterized as the elder sister, as you said?
Because she is 11 years older than me, and her knowledge and high experience are respected.
Our exclusive with Defense Minister of Myanmar. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world.